Hospitals crippled, businesses shattered, entire economies on the brink of ruin. These 15 nations thought they could replace Filipinos. They thought they didn't need them. They were dead wrong. Now, they're desperate, they're begging, they're throwing money, visas, anything to bring Filipinos back. But here's the real twist: will Filipinos even want to return? Or will these nations suffer the consequences permanently? The #1 country on this list, it came seconds from total collapse. Smash that like if you know Filipinos are irreplaceable. New Zealand's rolling farmlands weren't just a postcard-perfect landscape, they were a dairy empire. Billions in revenue, global exports, a farming industry that fed millions. And at the heart of it all, Filipino workers. These weren't just farmhands, they were the unseen powerhouse, the relentless workforce that kept the entire industry alive. Milking thousands of cows before sunrise, fixing machinery in the dead of night, running farms like a well-oiled machine. Then, in 2018, New Zealand made the dumbest move imaginable. They locked out thousands of skilled Filipino workers with stricter visa policies, thinking locals would step up. Farmers shrugged, no big deal, we'll manage. But reality hit like a sledgehammer to the face. And then the collapse began. Cows went unmilked. Dairy production crashed. Profits disappeared overnight. Entire supply chains fell apart, crops rotted in the fields, processing plants sat idle, farmers started losing everything. The worst part, the local workers the government had hoped would replace Filipinos, they quit, couldn't handle the pressure, didn't want the job. And just like that, the industry was in free fall. By 2020, New Zealand was on its knees. Milk shortages skyrocketed. Export numbers plummeted. Farmers were going bankrupt. Panic set in. Desperate farmers flooded the government with pleas. Bring them back, or we're finished. The government had a choice: admit failure or let the industry die. 2021, the surrender. They caved, silently. Visas were fast-tracked, wages were jacked up, every roadblock they had set up against Filipino workers torn down in desperation. But here's the cold hard truth: it was too damn late. Farms had shut down, millions were lost. The damage? Irreversible. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a catastrophe, a wake-up call to every country that thinks they can discard Filipino workers without consequences. Because history has proven it. When you push away the very people holding your industry together, you don't just struggle, you collapse. Drop a comment: should governments stop playing games and prioritize the workers who actually keep their economies running? And if you think this was bad, wait till you see #3. Hit subscribe. You're not ready for what's next. Australia, a land of opportunity, prosperity, and resilience. A nation built by immigrants, where Filipino workers played a crucial role for decades, filling essential jobs in healthcare, construction, and hospitality. But then everything changed. In 2017, the government introduced stricter visa rules. Overnight, thousands of Filipino caregivers, skilled builders, and restaurant staff were shut out. At first, no one panicked. Australia is self-sufficient, they thought. We'll be fine. They were wrong. Hospitals filled with patients, but there weren't enough nurses. Construction sites sat unfinished because no one was there to build. Hotels and restaurants turned away customers because there was no one to serve them. Then came 2020, the breaking point. When the world was brought to its knees, Australia finally felt the full weight of its mistake. A healthcare system on the verge of collapse, an economy gasping for workers. Desperation set in. The government scrambled to reverse its policies. They reopened their doors to Filipino workers. The very people they had once pushed away, they were now begging to return. But was it too late? Some businesses never recovered. Some families lost everything. Some wounds may never heal. One policy shift brought a nation to its knees. The construction industry, once booming, saw deadlines crumble. Skilled labor was nowhere to be found, and projects that should have taken months dragged on for years. The hospitality sector suffered a crushing blow. Restaurants that had once been fully booked now had empty tables because there was no staff to run them. Tourists came, but service fell apart. Australia's global reputation as a welcoming, efficient destination started to crack. And healthcare? A full-blown disaster. Nurses and caregivers were stretched beyond their limits, burnout rates soared, and patients suffered long wait times for even the most basic care. Aged care homes, which relied heavily on Filipino staff, struggled to provide even minimal service. By the time the government realized its mistake, the damage was already done. They offered higher wages, faster visa approvals, and desperate incentives to bring Filipino workers back. But many had already moved on, choosing countries that valued their skills from the start. Australia learned the hard way that when you take workers for granted, the consequences are brutal. The question remains, what if they had never shut the doors? Would the nation have avoided this chaos? Your thoughts? Drop them in the comments, and if you thought this was intense, wait until you see number 5. Smash that like button so you don't miss what's next. Imagine this. You've saved for years to take your dream vacation to Spain. Sunny beaches, world-famous paella, and a 5-star hotel with breathtaking views. But when you arrive, something feels off. The hotel lobby, a chaotic mess. The front desk has a long, frustrated line with just one overwhelmed employee. Room service? Forget about it. Restaurants closing early because they don't have enough staff. You think, maybe I just picked the wrong hotel. But no, this is happening everywhere. So what went wrong? Spain made a catastrophic mistake. For decades, Filipino workers were the backbone of Spain's hospitality and healthcare industries. They ran the hotels, they cared for the elderly, they kept the system alive. But in the mid-2000s, Spain's government decided to tighten work permits and cut back on hiring foreign labor. A big mistake. Hotels struggled to find experienced staff. Restaurants lost their best chefs and servers. Tourists flooded Spain but were met with terrible service, long wait times, and a hospitality industry in free fall. And healthcare, a complete disaster. Hospitals were overwhelmed, patients waited hours, sometimes days, just to be seen. Elderly care homes, once thriving with compassionate Filipino caregivers, were now drowning under staff shortages. Families had no choice but to take care of aging relatives themselves, quitting their jobs just to pick up the slack. Spain's once thriving tourism industry, the backbone of its economy, started to crumble. Negative reviews skyrocketed. Businesses that had been passed down for generations suddenly faced bankruptcy. Some didn't survive. By 2015, the Spanish government was forced to backtrack. They quietly reopened their doors to Filipino workers desperate to undo the damage. They fast-tracked visas, they sweetened employment packages, they did everything they could to bring them back. But here's the problem. It was too late. Many Filipino workers had already moved on, choosing countries that valued their skills before a crisis hit. And now, with labor shortages crippling industries worldwide, is your country next? The warning signs are everywhere. Skilled workers are leaving, industries are collapsing, and governments still asleep at the wheel. Drop a fire emoji if you think governments are ignoring the real workforce crisis. And if you thought this was shocking, just wait until you see number 4. Smash that like button because what's coming next will leave you speechless. Alright, picture this. It's 2015 and your kid just attempted to fly off the garage roof. Because of course they did. You rushed to the ER expecting the usual chaotic but efficient emergency room. Instead, you find a waiting area packed to the brim. Parents pacing, kids crying. A nurse, exhausted and barely keeping it together, steps forward and announces the current wait time is 12 hours. Wait, what? 12 hours? For a broken arm? What the hell happened? For decades, Filipino nurses were the backbone of America's healthcare system. They took the toughest shifts. They staffed the busiest hospitals. They cared for millions, especially in rural areas where American nurses refused to work. But then, Washington made a catastrophic mistake. In the 2010s, lawmakers decided, let's cut back on work visas. We have enough American nurses. Spoiler alert, we didn't. What happened next? A nightmare. Hospitals were drowning. Nurses were stretched so thin, they were working double, even triple shifts, burnout exploded, resignations skyrocketed, patient care collapsed, and then there was Sarah, a single mom, a dedicated nurse, working tirelessly in a Midwestern hospital. When the visa cuts hit, her unit lost half its staff overnight. She picked up extra shifts, missing her kids' birthdays, soccer games, everything. Then, after a brutal 16-hour shift, she made a critical medication error, a mistake that could have been fatal. Thankfully, it was caught in time, but for Sarah, that was it. She walked away from nursing forever, and she wasn't alone. Thousands followed. The cold, hard numbers. According to a 2024 Boston Globe report, 1 in 5 registered nursing jobs in home healthcare and nursing homes remains unfilled. Massachusetts hospitals alone spent $1.1 billion last year on temporary nurses just to keep running. By 2018, the US government was in full-blown crisis mode. They scrambled to reverse the visa restrictions, practically begging Filipino nurses to return, but the damage already done. The fallout, patients suffered. Medical errors increased, hospitals crumbled under the weight of their own policies. One reckless decision, a nation brought to its knees. Could it happen again? With global labor shortages rising fast, are we about to repeat history? The signs are flashing, hospitals are collapsing, burnout is at an all-time high, and yet governments are still making the same deadly mistakes. Drop a fire in the comments if you think politicians need a wake-up call, and if you thought this was insane, wait until you see number 7 not. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what's coming next, it'll leave you shook. Imagine this. It's a freezing winter night in Canada. A blizzard howls outside as you huddle in your car, gripping the steering wheel, your breath fogging up the windshield. In the back seat, your mother, pale, shivering, struggling to breathe. You push the gas pedal harder. The nearest hospital is 40 minutes away. There's no choice. You have to make it. But when you arrive, the nightmare begins. The ER is a war zone. Stretchers packed into hallways, patients slumped in chairs, a nurse rushes past you, barely looking up. You plead, "She can't breathe, please, we need help." The nurse doesn't even blink. "I'm sorry, there are no beds available. You'll have to wait." What the hell happened? For decades, Filipino nurses were Canada's safety net. They worked the brutal shifts, kept emergency rooms running, and cared for seniors in nursing homes. They didn't just fill gaps, they held the system together. But then, in the early 2000s, Canada made a devastating mistake. They tightened immigration policies, they made it harder for foreign-trained nurses to work. Instead of stepping into hospitals, qualified nurses were stuck flipping burgers or driving Ubers, because Canada demanded they spend years and thousands of dollars to requalify. Fast forward to 2023, and the cracks in the system turned into gaping wounds. Canada was short over 60,000 nurses. ER wait times shattered records. Some patients waited 15, 18, even 24 hours. Surgeries were postponed for months. People started dying in waiting rooms. And in nursing homes, elderly patients sat in soiled diapers for hours because there weren't enough caregivers. Patients missed life-saving medication. Nurses were so overworked, they had to choose, which patient do I help first? Then came the breaking point. January 2024, Toronto General Hospital. A woman in her 70s collapses in the ER. Heart attack. The doctors are there. The equipment is ready. But there's no bed available, no staff to move her, no nurse to assist. She dies. This wasn't a freak accident. It was a direct result of Canada's policy failures. And now they're scrambling to fix it. Too little, too late? By 2024, provinces started desperately backpedaling. Alberta threw $7,800,000 at fast-tracking foreign-trained nurses. Ontario launched a crisis plan to recruit thousands of Filipino nurses. They even offered to cover requalification costs. But here's the question. Can you rebuild a broken system when the damage is already done? Your turn. Is Canada finally waking up, or is this just the start of something worse? Smash that like button if you think nurses deserve better. Drop a comment if you've ever had a brutal ER wait time, and hit subscribe because next we're exposing another country's healthcare disaster. And trust me, this one's even more terrifying. Stay tuned. This is just getting started. What if your parents right now were trapped in their own homes, unable to move, unable to eat, unable to call for help? What if they fell in the middle of the night, lay there for hours, and no one came? What if they died simply because no one was there? This is not a nightmare. This is Italy's brutal reality. For decades, Italy relied on Filipino caregivers to care for its elderly, bathing them, feeding them, helping them take medication, being their only source of human connection. They weren't just workers, they became family. But then, Italy made a catastrophic mistake. The decision that broke the system. In 2020, the Italian government, in a push to prioritize local workers, slashed work permits for foreign caregivers. Their logic? Italians can do these jobs. But there was one massive flaw in their plan. Nobody wanted to do them. Caregiving is exhausting, it's 24/7, it's emotionally and physically draining. Many Italian workers weren't willing to take on the role, and those who did, they demanded double the salary, something struggling families couldn't afford. So what happened? Elderly Italians were left completely alone. Sons and daughters who relied on Filipino caregivers had to quit their jobs to take care of their parents. Nursing homes overflowed with abandoned seniors. But with too few staff, patients were left in their beds for hours, some developing severe infections from untreated wounds. Others simply stopped eating. And then the deaths started. The breaking point. By 2023, Italy's senior crisis reached horrifying levels. In Rome, a 91-year-old man was found dead in his apartment 3 weeks after he had passed. No one had checked on him. His caregiver had been deported due to visa restrictions. His son, living in another city, assumed someone was caring for him. But there was no one, no family, no nurse, no government aid, just silence. In Milan, an 87-year-old woman collapsed in her home. She pressed her emergency alert button, but there was no caregiver assigned to respond. She lay there for 2 days before a neighbor found her barely alive. By 2024, Italy was in full-blown panic mode. The government rushed to reverse their decision, creating fast-track visas for Filipino caregivers, even offering financial incentives to bring them back. Families begged for their former caregivers to return, but many had moved on to countries that valued their work. Now, Italy faces a painful question. Can they undo the damage? Or have they permanently destroyed the trust of the very people who once held their elderly in their arms? What do you think? Should caregivers be treated with more respect and better pay? Smash that like button if you believe their work is undervalued. Drop a comment if you've ever seen how vital they are. And subscribe because next we're exposing another country's labor disaster. And trust me, this one is even worse. Stay tuned, this is just getting started. What if one government decision suddenly made your home disappear? One moment you're living in a country where you've built a life, where your children go to school, where you've worked for years. The next, you're being forced out. No warning, no appeal, just an order to leave. No backup plan, no savings to fall back on, just a suitcase and the fear of an uncertain future. That's exactly what happened to thousands of Filipino migrant workers in South Korea. Many had lived there for decades, legally working in construction, factories, and domestic jobs. They weren't just laborers, they were part of the economy, filling roles that South Koreans didn't want. But then, one decision changed everything. In 2017, South Korea launched one of its biggest immigration crackdowns, targeting undocumented workers. The goal? To reduce illegal employment and free up jobs for locals. On paper, it sounded logical, but in reality, it led to raids, arrests, and mass deportations. Many Filipinos found themselves hunted down like criminals. Factories were raided in the middle of shifts. Workers were dragged out of dormitories in the dead of night. Some had been in Korea for over a decade, paying taxes, raising families, only to be treated like criminals and thrown out with nothing. The hardest hit, Filipino construction workers. They had built the very infrastructure South Korea depended on. Roads, buildings, even parts of the subways. But when the crackdown began, they were among the first to be forced out. The catastrophe no one saw coming. At first, South Korea's government celebrated. "We're protecting jobs for our people," officials declared. But there was one problem. South Koreans didn't want these jobs. Construction sites suddenly stood empty. Projects that were supposed to take months stretched into years. Skyscrapers remained unfinished, roads unpaved, entire industries thrown into chaos. The South Korean workers who were supposed to replace Filipinos, they refused to do the grueling, low-paid work. By 2019, the damage was undeniable. The government had no choice but to reverse its decision. Suddenly, the same workers they had expelled were being invited back, with better wages, faster processing, and even incentives. But for many, it was too late. Families had been separated, lives had been uprooted. One Filipino worker, Joseph, had lived in Korea for 15 years before being deported. By the time South Korea begged for workers to return, he had already started a new life elsewhere. They treated us like we didn't matter. Now they want us back? Did South Korea learn its lesson, or could history repeat itself? Smash that like button if you believe workers deserve better treatment. Drop a comment if you've seen a country suffer from a labor shortage, and subscribe because what happened next? It's even worse. Stay tuned, this is just getting started. Have you ever felt the weight of an entire city pressing down on you when everything moves too fast and there's never enough time? Now imagine being a working parent in Hong Kong, juggling a demanding job, long commutes, and a household that never stops needing attention. For years, there was one thing that made it all possible: Filipino domestic workers. And then, almost overnight, that lifeline was cut off. For decades, Filipino workers were more than just helpers. They were the invisible force keeping Hong Kong's fast-paced society running. They managed households, cared for children, assisted the elderly, and became deeply integrated into the families they served. Many stayed for years, forming bonds that went beyond employment. But then, in 2020, the Hong Kong government made a drastic decision. In an attempt to reduce dependence on foreign labor, the government tightened visa policies and capped contract renewals for domestic workers. Their reasoning? We need to give more job opportunities to locals. At first, it seemed like a step toward self-sufficiency, but there was one massive problem. Hong Kong locals didn't want these jobs. Almost immediately, families found themselves in crisis. Single parents, working professionals, and elderly couples suddenly left without help, struggled to cope. Children missed school because there was no one to take them. Grandparents were left unattended. Meals were skipped. Homes, once smoothly run, became chaotic. Take the case of Margaret, a corporate executive and mother of 3. For 6 years, she relied on Anna, her Filipino domestic worker, to keep things in order. Anna knew everything: Margaret's kids' school schedules, dietary needs, even their bedtime routines. But when Anna was forced to leave due to the new restrictions, Margaret was left scrambling. At first, she tried hiring local help, but it was nearly impossible. Few were willing to take on the demanding hours, and those who did often lacked experience. Eventually, she had to cut her work hours just to manage her own home, a reality faced by thousands of Hong Kong families. The backlash was inevitable. By 2022, Hong Kong was feeling the full impact. Productivity in workplaces dropped as more parents had to stay home. Elderly care facilities saw a surge in demand, but staff shortages made conditions unbearable. Complaints flooded the government, and families began paying exorbitant fees just to bring their Filipino helpers back. Realizing their mistake, the Hong Kong government quietly reversed its policies. Visa restrictions were lifted, contracts were renewed, and Filipino domestic workers were once again in high demand. But for many, the damage was already done. Families had struggled, careers had been disrupted, and trust had been broken. The question now is, will Hong Kong make the same mistake again? Smash that like button if you believe skilled caregivers are irreplaceable. Drop a comment if you've seen firsthand how much of a difference they make. And stay tuned, because what happened next, it's even more shocking. What happens when the very workers who keep a nation afloat are suddenly shut out? Imagine a bustling metropolis, known for its efficiency, suddenly brought to its knees. Not by war, not by disaster, but by a single policy decision. That's exactly what happened in Singapore, when the government made a critical miscalculation. For decades, Filipino nurses, domestic helpers, and skilled laborers have been the backbone of Singapore's healthcare system and workforce. They weren't just employees. They were the silent force ensuring hospitals ran smoothly, elderly citizens received care, and essential industries functioned without disruption. But then, in 2021, Singapore made a drastic move. It drastically reduced work permits for foreign labor, aiming to prioritize local employment. At first, the policy seemed logical. The government promised that Singaporeans would step in to fill the gaps. But there was one massive problem. Singaporeans didn't want these jobs. The healthcare sector in particular was hit hardest. Fewer nurses, fewer hospital aides, and an overwhelmed system. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Take Tan Tock Seng Hospital, one of Singapore's largest medical centers. Within months of the policy change, the hospital saw a massive shortage of nurses. Patients were forced to wait hours, sometimes days, for basic care. Emergency rooms overflowed. Surgeries were postponed, and in elder care homes where Filipino caregivers had been the heart and soul of daily operations, residents were left with minimal support. Families felt the impact too. The chaos wasn't limited to hospitals. Thousands of Singaporean households that had depended on Filipino domestic workers suddenly found themselves without help. Parents struggled to juggle full-time jobs with childcare. The elderly, once cared for by devoted helpers, were left unattended. The nation that prided itself on order and efficiency was now in disarray. The government backtracks, but was it too late? By mid-2022, reality hit hard. Singapore was facing a full-blown labor crisis. Productivity plummeted, healthcare was on the verge of collapse, and public frustration reached an all-time high. The government had no choice but to reverse course. They fast-tracked work visas, raised wages, and even provided incentives just to lure back the very workers they had turned away. But the damage was done. Many Filipino workers had already sought opportunities elsewhere, countries that valued their contributions and provided better job security. The question remains, did Singapore learn its lesson, or could this happen again? Smash that like button if you believe essential workers deserve more respect. Drop a comment, what would happen if your country lost its healthcare workers overnight? And stay tuned, because next we're exposing an even bigger labor disaster. Japan, the land of cherry blossoms, high-speed trains, and cutting-edge robotics. A country known for its precision and discipline. But what happens when that precision fails? When a single policy miscalculation sends entire industries into crisis? That's exactly what happened when Japan made a critical mistake in its labor policies. For years, Filipino workers were Japan's silent backbone, not just in caregiving, but in construction, manufacturing, and service industries. They took on the jobs many locals refused, keeping Japan's economy running smoothly. But in 2015, Japan's government introduced tighter immigration policies, drastically reducing the number of work visas available to foreign laborers. The goal? To encourage more Japanese citizens to take these roles. The reality? It backfired. At first, the effects weren't obvious. Factories operated as usual, construction sites kept moving, but behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. By 2017, Japan's labor shortage had reached crisis levels. Orders piled up in factories with no workers to fulfill them. Delayed construction projects cost companies billions. Hotels, restaurants, and even public transport systems struggled to keep up with demand. And then came the breaking point, the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Japan was set to host one of the world's biggest sporting events, welcoming millions of visitors. But there was a massive problem: not enough workers to run the show. Hotels couldn't staff their rooms. Airports faced long delays. Even the food industry was hit hard, with restaurants struggling to keep up. With just months before the Olympics, Japan's government had no choice but to reverse its strict immigration policies. They rushed to rehire foreign workers, reopen visa programs, and even introduce new work incentives. But there was one issue: they were too late. Many Filipino workers had already moved on to better opportunities in countries that valued their contributions. Japan's once reliable labor force had found new homes elsewhere. Some returned reluctantly, but others refused, leaving Japan scrambling to recover. The question now is, did Japan learn from its mistake, or could history repeat itself? Smash that like button if you believe governments should plan ahead. Drop a comment, what would happen if your country suddenly lost its workers? And stay tuned, because next we're exposing another global labor crisis. For years, Malaysia's hotels, restaurants, and retail businesses thrived, drawing millions of tourists and shoppers. But behind the scenes, one group kept everything running smoothly: Filipino workers. Known for their exceptional hospitality, efficiency, and dedication, they weren't just employees, they were the backbone of Malaysia's service industry. But then came 2016, and a massive mistake: the government's costly decision. In an attempt to prioritize local employment, Malaysia's government tightened labor laws, slashing work permits, making visa renewals nearly impossible, and forcing thousands of skilled Filipino workers to leave. Officials assumed that locals would step in to fill the gap. No, you didn't. Hotels scrambled to hire replacements. Restaurants rushed to train new staff. Retail stores brought in temporary workers. But the results? A complete disaster. Almost overnight, customer complaints skyrocketed. Hotels, once known for their world-class service, started receiving terrible reviews due to inexperienced staff. Restaurants struggled with slow service, incorrect orders, and frustrated customers. Retail stores faced massive employee turnover as locals quit, unwilling to do the same work Filipinos once handled with ease. The damage spread fast. Tourists noticed. Business travelers chose Singapore instead. High-spending visitors opted for Thailand. Malaysia's once booming service sector began to crumble. By 2018, the economy was feeling the impact. Hotels were short-staffed and losing millions. Restaurants couldn't keep up with demand. Shopping malls, once packed, saw fewer customers as service quality continued to decline. By 2019, Malaysia had no choice but to admit its mistake. The government rushed to reinstate work permits and loosen visa restrictions to bring Filipino workers back. But here's the problem. Many had already left for better opportunities elsewhere. Businesses that once thrived on Filipino efficiency struggled to recover, and Malaysia learned the hard way that some workers simply aren't replaceable. So, did Malaysia learn its lesson, or is history doomed to repeat itself? Hit that subscribe button for more shocking insights on global labor disasters. Smash that like button if you think workers deserve better. And drop a comment, what happens when businesses lose their best employees? Stay tuned, because what's coming next will blow your mind. For years, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, was a land of opportunity, a place where towering skyscrapers, luxurious hotels, and world-class hospitals flourished. Behind the scenes, Filipino workers played a crucial role in making it all happen. From nurses in hospitals to engineers on construction sites and hospitality workers in five-star resorts, they were the backbone of the UAE's booming economy. But then came 2020, and everything changed. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the UAE made a drastic decision, suspending thousands of Filipino work permits. Officials believed that cutting back on foreign workers would help manage the economic downturn. They were wrong. The effects were immediate and devastating. Hospitals struggled. With a severe nursing shortage, ICU units were overwhelmed, patients waited hours for medical attention, and the healthcare system, once ranked among the best, faced an unprecedented crisis. Construction projects came to a halt. Dubai's ambitious skyline filled with half-finished towers suddenly went silent. Without skilled Filipino engineers, electricians, and builders, deadlines were missed and billions of dollars were lost. Tourism took a massive hit. Luxury hotels, famous for their world-class service, found themselves short-staffed, service quality plummeted, and high-paying visitors chose other destinations. By 2021, the situation had spiraled out of control. The UAE, once a symbol of rapid development, was struggling to keep up. By 2022, the UAE had no choice but to reverse its decision. Desperate to recover, the government offered higher salaries, better contracts, and faster visa processing to bring Filipino workers back. But there was one big problem. Many had already moved on, finding better opportunities in Europe, Canada, and Australia. The UAE had to compete aggressively to attract them back, learning the hard way that some workers simply can't be replaced. So, what do you think? Should governments prioritize skilled foreign workers to avoid future crises? Drop a comment below, smash that like button if you believe workers deserve better treatment, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories because the next one, it's even bigger. Qatar, a country of luxury, sky-high ambitions, and world-class hospitality. From five-star hotels to elite restaurants and airlines, service was king. And behind it all, Filipino workers. They weren't just employees, they were the heartbeat of Qatar's booming tourism industry, efficient, skilled, and irreplaceable. But in 2017, disaster struck. The diplomatic crisis that changed everything. Seemingly overnight, Qatar was plunged into chaos. A diplomatic standoff with neighboring Gulf countries led to mass job losses, economic turmoil, and an exodus of foreign workers. The first to suffer? The very people who made Qatar's tourism industry thrive, thousands of Filipino workers. Hotels lost their best staff, service declined instantly. Without the expertise of Filipino hospitality workers, check-ins were delayed, room services crumbled, and guest complaints skyrocketed. Restaurants struggled. Qatar's once thriving fine dining industry took a hit. Chefs, waiters, and kitchen staff were forced out, leaving understaffed businesses struggling to meet demand. Airlines crippled. Qatar Airways, one of the world's leading airlines, faced a crisis as trained flight attendants and ground staff were abruptly removed, causing delays, cancellations, and frustrated passengers. The impact was devastating. Qatar had positioned itself as a top global tourist destination, but as service crumbled, so did its reputation. Tourism revenue plummeted. High-paying visitors, once eager to indulge in Qatar's luxury, turned elsewhere. The country was bleeding money, and fast. By 2018, it was clear Qatar had made a catastrophic mistake. With no skilled workforce to replace the Filipinos, businesses sank into crisis mode. Desperation set in. Hotels slashed rates to attract guests, but poor service drove them away. Restaurants closed. Airlines faced public backlash. It wasn't just an economic issue, it was a national embarrassment. By 2019, Qatar had no choice but to reverse course. They reopened doors to Filipino workers, but this time they were begging. Higher wages, faster visas, better contracts. The same workers they once let go were now the country's lifeline, but for many, the damage was already done. Qatar had learned its lesson the hard way. So what do you think? Should governments value their workforce more before it's too late? Drop a comment below. Smash that like button if you believe skilled workers deserve better, and subscribe now because the next story is even more shocking. Kuwait, a country of gleaming skyscrapers, oil wealth, and luxury. But behind the glitz, who kept it all running? Nurses in hospitals, nannies in homes, clerks in businesses, tens of thousands of Filipino workers. For years, they cared for Kuwaiti families, tended to the sick, and powered the economy. Then in 2018, everything unraveled. The day Kuwait lost its workforce. A shocking scandal exposed horrific abuses against Filipino domestic workers. Stories of mistreatment, unpaid wages, and even tragic deaths made headlines. The Philippine government had seen enough. In a historic move, they issued a total ban on Filipino workers migrating to Kuwait. Kuwait's response? Denial. Officials dismissed the ban, claiming the country could easily replace Filipino workers. They reassured businesses, hospitals, and families that nothing would change. They couldn't have been more wrong. At first, Kuwait's leaders acted like it was business as usual, but within months, reality hit, and it hit hard. Hospitals fell into crisis. The majority of Kuwait's nurses were Filipino. When they left, the healthcare system buckled. Patient care suffered, emergency rooms overflowed, and ICUs were dangerously understaffed. Households spiraled into chaos. Families that had relied on Filipino domestic workers for years suddenly had no one to cook, clean, or care for their children and elderly relatives. Desperate, many tried to hire replacements, but found no one willing to do the job. Businesses suffered heavy losses. Hotels, restaurants, and service industries that depended on Filipino workers faced mass resignations. Customer service declined, delays mounted, and revenue plummeted. Even Kuwait's oil sector, the backbone of its economy, struggled with worker shortages. For the first time, Kuwait realized just how deeply it depended on Filipino labor. By 2020, Kuwait was in crisis. The country's economy was faltering, businesses were desperate, and hospitals were issuing emergency job postings. The government had no choice but to backtrack. They rushed into negotiations with the Philippines, offering higher wages to attract workers back, better contracts with stricter protections, promises of safety to regain trust. But was it too late? Many Filipino workers, burned by the experience, chose other countries instead. The damage was done. Kuwait had learned a brutal lesson. Workers aren't disposable. What's the real cost of losing skilled workers? Should governments treat foreign workers better before crisis strikes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe workers deserve respect, hit that like button and subscribe, because the final case on this list, it's the most shocking one yet. Saudi Arabia, a kingdom of wealth, power, and ambition. But beneath the glittering skyscrapers and billion-dollar medical facilities lies a dark truth. The moment they turned their backs on Filipino healthcare workers, people started dying. For decades, Filipino nurses, midwives, and medical staff kept Saudi hospitals running. They were the first ones in, the last ones out, working tirelessly to save lives. They weren't just employees, they were the backbone of the system. Then, in 2011, Saudi Arabia made a catastrophic decision. The arrogance that led to disaster. The government, convinced it could replace Filipino workers, slashed recruitment, tightened visas, and pushed for local hires. Officials boasted that Saudi Arabia would no longer rely on foreign medical staff. They thought they had it all figured out. They were dead wrong. Hospitals turned into war zones. At first, it seemed like business as usual, but soon cracks turned into full-blown fractures. Nurses vanished overnight. Emergency rooms flooded with patients, but there weren't enough hands to treat them. People waited hours, some died waiting. Underqualified replacements fumbled in crisis. The government tried to fill the gap with workers from other countries, but they lacked the skill, the experience, the urgency. Medical errors soared, and patient trust collapsed. Overworked doctors were pushed past their limits. With no Filipino nurses to assist them, doctors had to juggle everything: charting, medications, even bedside care. Exhaustion led to mistakes. Mistakes led to deaths. Maternity wards became a nightmare. Saudi Arabia has a high birth rate, but with Filipino midwives gone, pregnant women faced chaos, delays, and overwhelmed staff. Imagine a mother in labor screaming in pain with no one to help her in time. And the elderly left to rot. Nursing homes, once staffed with compassionate, trained Filipino caregivers, became neglected, understaffed, and riddled with suffering. Saudi Arabia didn't just lose workers, it lost control. By 2020, hospitals were breaking under pressure. The very government that once claimed it could survive without Filipino workers was now begging them to come back. Wages skyrocketed because now they had to pay a premium just to undo their own mess. Visas were fast-tracked because delays meant more deaths. Better contracts were offered because Filipino workers weren't stupid. They saw what happened. But here's the real question. Why did it take thousands of lives lost before Saudi Arabia admitted its mistake The worst part, this never had to happen. This wasn't an accident, it was a decision. A reckless, short-sighted, arrogant decision that left innocent people suffering. And when the government finally crawled back, asking Filipino workers to return, they didn't do it out of respect. They did it because they had no other choice. So what now? Will Saudi Arabia make the same mistake again? Will another country follow in their footsteps? Drop a comment below, tell us what you think. And if this story pisses you off as much as it should, hit like, share, and subscribe, because we're not done exposing these disasters. The next one, it's even worse.